Thank you all very much for being here today. The presentation I'm going to give is the title has moved on slightly from the title I gave in the abstract, and it's talking about from representation of science parks to global science scapes. And what I'm going to present is I'm Paul Benneworth at the Centre for Higher Education Policy Studies at the University of Twente. And I'm presenting some work that we've really just started with Dave Valler at Oxford Brookes and Nick Phelps at University College London, which is trying to understand how this emerging phenomenon of global science landscapes, attempts by policymakers, by practitioners, by universities themselves, by research laboratories, to create coherent spaces that are attractive in the knowledge economy. What we're trying to do is we want to give that a rigorous theoretical underpinning and bring it back into mainstream debates in the spatial sciences. So in contrast to a typical seminar presentation where you start out with a question, you develop a theoretical framework, use that theoretical framework to structure some data, and then you make a contribution. What I'm going to do in this presentation is really try to make a case for a set of research questions being interesting, and they are the research questions that we are going to ask in this project. And what I'm hoping to achieve today with this presentation is to hear what you as spatial scientists, as a spatial planning department, think about this, to stimulate, to get a degree of reaction from you, to have a kind of scientific conversation, if you will, about global science scapes that will help inform us as we take this project forward in the next 2 years. So really where the story starts for me is about now 8 years ago, I came to the end of a fairly lengthy piece of research looking at the relationship between universities, spin-off companies, and economic development in the periphery, taking the University of Newcastle in England and Twente in the Netherlands. And I'd realised there was actually quite a lot more than met the eye to these phenomena. That it was not just that universities were creating spin-offs that were leading to economic development, but they were starting to become entangled into political networks, political decision-making. And it was almost as if the physical spaces that were emerging around to support spin-off companies, incubator units, specifically INEX and Mesa Plus, that these were becoming entangled into much wider networks. And so if you wanted to understand universities' territorial impacts, you had to understand the way that they plugged into these networks. And that was, we published in Progress in Planning and kind of drew a line under that. But my research pottered on in the background whilst doing other research, thinking about the way in which university campuses became ways in which diverse groups could find a shared interest. So policymakers, universities, entrepreneurs, financiers, publics, all could see themselves in some way represented in these particular physical landscapes. And so I was based at Twente, so I just started almost as a side hobby to start collecting the kinds of effective relationships that people had with these places. And so when Nick and Dave invited me to talk about this at a seminar they were organising in Korea, where they brought together a range of people who were doing similar kinds of things, I thought this is very interesting, and those discussions led to the project, or a special issue in Environment and Planning C, and ultimately the project that we have today, where we are focusing at looking at how global science scapes are ways of coupling places to global networks in ways that benefit the locality. So that's really in what I admit is a back-to-front presentation. That's the story I'm going to tell. So I'm going to specifically talk about the University of Twente and give you quite a lot of empirical information to understand why I've been thinking about it this way. And the University of Twente is an old textiles region. It was specifically supported after the independence of Belgium to give the Netherlands a strong textiles region with the loss of the Flemish textiles provinces. And it developed with a huge amount of state support under the Crown and later democratic government. But in the post-war period, with the loss of colonies, with the creation of the European community, the reduction of tariff barriers, and a degree of complacency from both owners and unions, the industry went into decline. A decline that was ultimately to prove more or less terminal, with the honourable exception of Ten Carter. And from the 1950s onwards, regional industries realised that a critical moment had been reached in the region's development trajectory, and that in the post-war industrial society that was emerging, a university was critical to the region if the industry was to be revived. In the late 1950s, there was a competition for a third technical university for the Netherlands. It was awarded to Enschede. It became the Technical High School Twente. Today it's the University of Twente. And as the industry continued its decline, it realised that simply focusing on textiles wasn't enough. But it realised as an engineering university, it had a huge amount of knowledge that it could push out into the region, and it adopted the mechanism of spin-off companies as a means of doing that. And really, in 1987, it rebranded itself as the University of Twente. It took the byline the Entrepreneurial University, encouraging technical spin-outs to try and revitalise this industrial region, which to this day continues to lag the Dutch mean as an advanced knowledge economy. And so this is where we were roughly 2007. This is the Mesa Plus laboratory. When I was doing my research here, this is a nanotechnology laboratory. So the basic idea was that there was very high quality research, world-leading publishing in Nature, physical papers in physical science, these kinds of things. But the research was being done by a community, professors, associate assistant professors, master students, PhD students, bachelor students. And some of them would would primarily focus on the research side of things, but some of them were learning useful skills with which you could set up companies. And a whole kind, not just in nanotechnology, but in a range of areas, the university realised that it was politically useful to justify its existence by pointing to these spin-out companies. To the south of the university, in the 1980s, the university had developed a business and technology centre to encourage more interaction with society. This had developed into a business and science park. And so from the early 2000s, you see maps like this emerging, indicating that when you look at the urban structure of the region of Twente, these are the main cities in Twente, then you have a number of important physical infrastructures. You have the railways, you have the motorways, you have the canal system, but you have the airport, but you also have this new knowledge district formed by the University of Twente and the Business and Science Park. And so the idea of Kennis Park was an attempt to put this more firmly on the map, if you will. So the idea was that the campus in the mid-2000s, the campus and the science park were still separate, but by eliminating the physical barriers between them and the organisational barriers between them, you would create a new kind of knowledge district. And the red line that you see there, that's the main road between Enschede and Hengelo. It was, until 2011, it was an elevated flyover, a trunk road, that physically separated the science park from the university. And a huge amount of money was spent eliminating it as the first step in creating an integrated space. And so this is where we got to. This was our paper in Progress and Planning, where we started to say, well, there seems as if different kinds of people are investing different kinds of interests in this. So there are professors who are winning Spinoza prizes, who are getting Max Planck awards for the quality of their research. There's a university that's demonstrating its survival by being useful. There is a province, the municipality, who are validating their economic development policy, their innovation policy. There are spatial planners who have a way to understand what's going on there in their own terms. And so this is where I started collecting representations, and I found that you could really separate these into four classes of narrative about what precisely this knowledge park, Kennis Park, is. So there's a set of narratives that it's a kind of strategic science location. So this is a page taken from a report that appeared at the end of 2013. This was done for the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and it's an overview of the science-scape ecology of the Netherlands, and it's listing how well developed various types of knowledge campus are. And so I'm trying to think, is Delft listed there? Is 21 Delft? Yes. So Delft Technopolis, that's one of the adult ones, as is Enschede, their number 7, the Kennispark in the east of the Netherlands. So that helps local policymakers in the east to say, Delft might be twice our size, it might be an ancient university, but in terms of valorisation, we are contributing equally through Kennispark to the Dutch knowledge economy. It was constituted as a kind of an investment in a strategic agenda. So you start to see these kinds of maps circulating that say, well, where you have regional policymakers saying, what are the main problems that we face as a region? We need to deal with the inner city in Hengelo, Hart van Zuid. We need to address the fact that the airport has now been closed. We've got a housing for very rich people in Van Aker. And then Kennispark Twente, this is going to be the marketplace of ideas that will propel the region forward. And it's also a kind of knowledge. There's an ecosystem for knowledge activities in the east of the Netherlands. So we've got businesses. There's all kinds of business support services. There's huge amounts of R&D going on. Businesses are active. So this is this isn't just something for Twente. This is a fertile place where anyone can come. And Cottonwood Investments, a venture capital company from Silicon Valley, have opened an office recently and have started making investments. One of the companies they've invested in is someone who has a robot hawk that airports can use to scare away birds that might get taken off into plane intakes during takeoff and landing. And so Silicon Valley has invested 1.6 million euros in this company. So it's clearly this is a science space in the international map. And this is the partnership representing themselves as everyone coming together. We know that in the age of austerity, Twente is going through difficult times. So everyone is making a contribution, coming together to work together hard, and with the results that can be seen. So there's this kind of it's a strategic site constituted by partnership, but it's also an entrepreneurial site. So it's not just that there's a physical landscape, but it's brought to life with the magic of entrepreneurship, exploiting innovation. So you've got this campus in the green. This is an aerial photo of the Kennispark. You can actually see my office on there. So I work here. It's an absolutely beautiful location. It's an attractive place to work, and it's part of the value is that it's bringing these two worlds, the dirty world of the economy and the ivory towers of science together. And the kinds of infrastructures that it's developing are physically, organisationally, legally coupling the different elements together. It's a kind of and people are trying to plan this to make it better. So instead of the 1960s motorway flyover that we had, you see that the worlds have been brought together across this leafy green boulevard, the Innovation Boulevard, which is supposed to provide a permeable membrane by which entrepreneurs and excellent academics can interact. But it's also it remains a university campus, so it's a closed-off space where excellent ideas are being generated. It's a living community encompassing students and staff. There are separate spaces for knowledge creation, but also for living. So this is where all the academic activities take place, and this is primarily students' accommodation, but there is still staff accommodation. The idea being, in the 1960s, as a textile city, you couldn't expect academics just to live in the city, so they had to create a special place where they could live and have the home comforts that they had until then experienced at Delft, because when it was created, all our professors originally came from Delft. It's a living laboratory, so it's not just an ivory tower, but it's an ivory tower with a societal purpose. So I've used the wrong photo, but this shows in the middle of one of the areas there's an ornamental lake, but it's also a heat sink, and is used as part of energy reclamation. But it's not an established project, it's also an ongoing piece of research. So the university is living the ideals of experimentation and this continual striving for knowledge that's becoming embedded in these entrepreneurial companies. And this is physically, it's a meeting place for the knowledge communities. So this is when all the knowledge activities are located around Central Plain. So this is physically located here. This is at the heart of the university campus, and the idea is that there are places where people can sort of take time to interact spontaneously with each other, both staff and students, between scientists and different faculties, between science and commerce. And they're selling herring to try and encourage people to use the spaces. So there's an unself-conscious living nature to the space. There's an aim to create bridges between different groups and interests. Everywhere you go in the university, you see these bridges between buildings, physically encouraging people to walk around. You can walk from one end of the campus to the other without actually getting wet if you know the way. What's interesting is very few people know the way because people still like to remain within their disciplinary silos. I like to walk about because I'm a spatial scientist, but there's very few of those. This is the output of it all, exciting and attractive investment opportunities. So we've got a student, you take a student, you put him in a group in this wonderful landscape, and he comes up with a robot hawk, Clear Flight Solutions. Cottonwood, this company from Silicon Valley, has invested 1.6 million in it. And and it's not just that Ray Quintana has come in and found a great idea. He says, Kenneth Park Twente is what made all of this possible. But there's also something about the kinds of this isn't just geeks doing technical stuff. This is a place where people live. We've got our own botanic gardens. It's a collection of pine trees that you can walk through when the sun shines. It was created from nothing in the 60s, and we let a load of architects all trained here, wild, to experiment on different ideas. So this is a Herman Hahn building, Cubicus it's called, from 1970. And he had the idea, he was inspired by African communal villages. The idea it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a Cubicus to raise a student. And so it's kind of it's a place of experimentation. Everywhere there's art, there's thought for the physical environment. This isn't actually a sunken church. But it's supposed to be a think piece. When you're walking around, you think, "Oh, we're in the Netherlands. Water's important." Could it be? But it's not. It's just a piece of art. We're physically connected to a bike ride around the city. So this is the entrance to the university library. But it's also the municipality has a bike tour. So people are literally physically channeled to go through the university and experience it. And you see that that's approximately a 3-kilometre stretch where the signs pull you towards it, propel you through the campus, out the other side into the business park, past the FC Twente Stadium, and into Twekelo, which is a kind of beautiful landscape. We have a carillon. Every hour it rings. The campuses in the university campuses aren't a campus without a carillon, so we have one too. And we have water, and in the Netherlands we're very scared of water, so we have to give the water the space now. So physically,
not in Twente.
But we've been having terrible flooding just in the last month, and you will suddenly understand this. So this was taken from last year, but this has become you think, oh, this is just quite nice. I've seen a couple having wedding photos taken there, but when it rains, this literally becomes a reservoir that stops rapid runoff and flooding in Roombeek. But it's also a symbolic location full of future promise. So we get lots of these kinds of images projected. This is the frog robot that whenever Twente appears or the university appears in the media, there's always these kinds of exciting futuristic things, whether it's a robot hawk or a robot frog. And this kind of promise becomes because Kenneth Park is a different kind of location. We have this building, the gallery, and this is the sort of the communal hub for the Kenneth Park knowledge ecosystem. And that is a gateway for the outside world into the fact that we are a strategic node in the Dutch nanotechnology research infrastructure. This is where the Mesa Plus building moved to. So it completely upsticks the whole research group, placed into a new €25 million building, primarily funded with national government resources. And people love to cut the national politicians, I've got a picture of the king coming up, where they love to be coming taken in front of that. So that's Mark Rutte together with the old university president and Miriam Lausing, who has single-handedly effectively constructed this. So it's important not to underestimate her contribution. This is our old mayor, Peter den Oudste, and he loves Kennis Park. He's willing to stand up and say that the municipality is proud of this. And it's also it's proud not only of what's being achieved today, but the fact that it builds on a history. And I think this is he was one of the original professors from Delft who moved to Enschede to make it all possible. And we even attract the attention of His Majesty Willem-Alexander, the King. And this was taken last year. This is a different view of the knowledge plane. The herring stall was removed for security reasons. And more recently, the Queen Mother, Beatrix, came to hand out the Royal Dutch Institute of Engineering Prize and again, it provides a backdrop to show how the Dutch government, the Dutch royal family, continues to do sensible things that are building sites like these that can build a prosperous future for the Netherlands. It's a site of opportunity, so there's still a huge amount of building work going on, similar to Delft. But for me, there's been no attempt to board it up. This is part of the allure. This is almost you too can have your exciting knowledge activity here. It's a kind of publicity machine. So here's Mark Rutte again standing outside of a company. It's a company that make machines that can print out, that allow the police to give you parking tickets immediately, and then for it to be immediately added to your record. And we see in the background that's the chairman of the university, but also the university PR machine. That's Yannick Veenstra there. She's one of the university PR officers, making sure that this good image of the university comes into the public. And so this is where I started in 2007. This was the concept of what the plane would be, this central knowledge space that would anchor the Kennis Park environment around it, where science and business meet each other. And since then, there's been an attempt to realise that. So the question then really becomes, well, how can we make sense of all of that? There are all these different stories, all these different images, all these different physical landscapes, these different organisations that are coming together, populating this new global science, this new science space. And those were the thoughts that I was playing with when I had an encounter with Dave and Nick. When we went to Korea for the STEPI seminar, we brought together a community of different people who were all looking at similar kinds of things from different angles. So there was a group of people who were rethinking how these knowledge spaces are becoming a variant of what you might think of the international campus garden suburb. That's the kind of the orthodoxy that took off around what if you want to build a technopole, then you have a university, you have a set of industry, you carve out a new space in the middle of nowhere, you make it beautiful, and people will come to you. Not so much Silicon Valley, but to some extent what happened with Sophia Antipolis, for example. There was a group of people who were talking about, well, you have these physical spaces, but they are populated. They become places where particular groups of people are doing particular kinds of new things. Tying very much to Annelies Saxenian's idea of new Argonauts, the sort of the people who were on a voyage of discovery and they would settle temporarily in particular places. They retained some of the characteristics of the places that they came from. So that in Silicon Valley, you see the Indian, Chinese entrepreneurs not simply creating something entirely novel there, but retaining very strong links back, functioning as a diaspora. So the kind of activities that they are undertaking in America have some of the hallmarks of China and India, but also China and India are affected by what's taking place in these spaces. And then we were interested to see there was kind of a third dimension that I hadn't really appreciated till I sat down in Korea. But it was there is something around these these spaces are about validating political systems. And we forget that in the 1970s, or thankfully Sir Peter Hall and Manuel Castells remembered for us, that science spaces were once in vogue as part of the big ideological clash between capitalism and communism. So it was being fought over a variety of domains, over the space missions. But Khrushchev, apparently the story goes, came to Silicon Valley at some point and was on a guided tour. And he thought at first it was a Potemkin village. But then he realised that actually it was taking place. Stanford University had spawned a number of spin-off companies that had this dense network of companies around them. And so he went back to the Soviet Union and demanded that if capitalism could produce this, then communism must be able to. So they created Akademgorodok, a kind of Soviet science city, attempting to create a physical, organizational space within which science, a kind of dynamic science, could produce public benefit in the communist system. And of course, we all thought after 1989 that those kinds of big ideological struggles were over. But you start to see all kinds of semi-quasi-democratic state development projects around the world are attempting to legitimize themselves by creating new science spaces and attempting to say, for all the imperfections in the way we govern our societies, we can still, through the magic of science, the magic of these science spaces, create value. So you see things like, Singapore, Malaysia in particular have taken great strides in that area. And so this is what led us to the project, Global Scapes, Dimensions of Transnationalism. So what we want to do in this project is really to kind of, from a series of people who've been looking at case studies with some kind of vague feeling that science spaces were doing multiple things, to try and bring them together and create a more systematic framework for that. So really what I want to do with the rest of the seminar is to open up that to get some feedback from you by putting forward our conceptual dimension for that. So I'll just take 5 minutes to go through it. None of us are cultural economy scholars, but we were inspired by Appadurai's work, where he was talking about the way in which the global cultural economy is constituted of scapes. That is to say, there's all these different types of flows, and in particular, they come together in different constellations in different places. And places' ability to control their future is affected by the way that they control these flows. So you have highly skilled people, but you also have inexpensive labour who are flowing around the world in huge numbers. There's kind of the images, and the other forms of cultural production are also flowing in particular hierarchies and networks. New technologies in the broadest sense, but from ideas to the kinds of infrastructures that enable all kinds of activities. Clearly, the architecture of the global finance system has an impact on places' ability to thrive in the global economy. And also, we were really taken by Appadurai because of the way that he foregrounds this idea of ideoscapes, that these big political projects that we perhaps for 25 years thought had disappeared have suddenly become important again. Ideas are being contested and are circulating, and places become critical moments in the struggles between ideas. So we see these kinds of science spaces as places that are trying to construct a future, to alter their situation within these types of networks in order to create a future for themselves. And in particular, we will in the 6 examples that we've started from, we see 3 kinds of flows and 3 kinds of factors as being important to the scapes that are produced. So we see that the physical forms of these places is important, reflecting the global circulation, as we said, the built environment and real estate formats. So these are definitely physical projects. They are buildings that are both financially attractive, but they are also meant to be inspiring in some way. They're supposed to have a function that stimulates these outcomes. There's a second element, the kind of ethnoscapes, which is that these places are trying to attract highly skilled people in a rather more nuanced way than the sort of a naive version of the rise of the creative class has it. So the people are on journeys throughout their lives, and what you want to do is bring people at the right moment in their lives where they can make a contribution, at the same time get something out of it. And then finally, we want to focus on the kind of ideoscapes. Clearly, in the Twente example, there's a very strong, there's a whole series of little people telling a big story. So Enschede says, we are the big municipality in the region of Twente. Twente says, we are not just some basket case region in the east, but we can be powerful. The Netherlands wants to say, we might just be 17 million people, but we're a high-tech place, we're the crossroads of Europe, and we are the place to be to achieve certain things. So what we want to do is examine the way these transnational flows come together in the particular places to create these global sciencescapes. So basically, that's what we want to do. So we want our methodology or our approach is to focus on the three types of scapes that we're thinking about. So firstly, we want to look at the physical form. Secondly, we want to look at their relation to international labour markets. And thirdly, to the kinds of ways in which they become tied into soft diplomacy and the battle of big ideas. That's we look from the smallest is arguably Kennispark in the Netherlands. Then you've got a few bigger ones. And then because obviously your project wants Henry Etzkowitz to get funded, we're delighted that he's on board bringing in Silicon Valley as a kind of macro example of this all. So these are the kinds of questions we're asking about the physical form. So we're trying to drill down into how the spatial imaginary emerges. And what we don't want to do is tell a happy family story to say that at some point someone had this brilliant idea and they've implemented it. These are places where people are making their lives, and the myth making and the myth of place, the genius loci, they are produced in a process. And we want to understand that by looking at the development of these places physically. And the way in which they bring in ideas from outside to legitimate themselves, as Kennispark has done, or the way in which their idea becomes reified and transmitted through the world, like Silicon Valley. We're then interested in the way that these ideas become bundled into these national development projects and soft diplomatic power. So we want to trace the ways in which these metaphors are projected about the world. It's kind of like the way that there was an interesting project that the UvA did, looking at the way that Vincent van Gogh's sunflower had flown around the world and had become embedded in all kinds of different places, and they traced and mapped that. So we're interested in kind of tracing and mapping how these particular visions have emerged to connect and hopefully improve these positions of places in the world, and how this sort of symbolic soft diplomacy is bound up with the materiality of the way that they've been constructed. And also we want to do something not a lot of people are talking about, which is how these places function as nodes of attraction for international labour. So a lot of the project is going to focus on trying to understand why the international migrants come to these places to try and make their lives there, and to try and relate that not just to the materiality of existence, but to the kind of the deeper spiritual, cultural, social dimensions of these places. We're hoping that we're thinking that we want to differentiate our case studies on the different kinds of dimensions, different kinds of variables that we want to distinguish, and take a slightly different method for each. So the physical location of stories is primarily document research. The international diplomatic, that's primarily policy document research. And then the interview, we're going to do a series of interviews with people to find out why people come to particular places. We're planning to run for 2 years. We had the kick-off meeting in Oxford last month. So at this stage, we're really just trying to get feedback from the wider scientific community to get some just things that we should be thinking about. So this is really what I've tried to present today. What's going on in Twente is complex and interesting, and we've tried to come up with a framework that can sort of give us a way to understand all these different things coming together. And I'm interested to hear the way in which you think about these things and different alternative ways you might have to bring that all together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul.